Welcome back. We're talking about data security, backup, disaster recovery. When doing your backup planning, you have to consider your RPO and your RTO. They're two very different and specific parameters that are closely related with recovery, but also very different in how you choose your recovery process. We're talking about recovery point objective and recovery time objective. The recovery time objective, RTO, is how long you can basically go without a specific application. This is often associated with your maximum allowable or tolerable outage or downtime. The RTO is usually used to dictate your use of app replication or a backup. This also dictates what you would build for an infrastructure, whether it's a high availability cluster for seamless failover or something more modest, like a backup appliance that you can virtualize in a matter of minutes or hours. If your RTO is 0, which means I cannot go down at all, then you must opt for completely redundant infrastructure with replicated data offsite and so on. If your RTO, recovery time objective, is 48 hours, then maybe you just need a cloud backup that is okay, and you can then virtualize on that cloud backup within that 48-hour window and meet the objective. The RTO really associates, just think about this, RTO equals how much downtime can your business afford. And you've really got to think about this, because if it takes you a day or two to restore your backup and be functional, what does that truly cost you in employee downtime, client satisfaction, lost revenue, lost sales? There's a lot that goes into factor besides just how long it takes to restore your server to working condition. When we start looking at backup planning, we also have to consider the RPO, the recovery point objective. The RPO is slightly different than the RTO. This dictates the allowable data loss. How much data can I lose? In other words, if I do a nightly backup at 7 p.m. and my system goes down at 4 p.m. the following day, everything that was changed since my last backup is lost. My RPO in this particular context is the previous day's backup at 7 p.m. If I'm a company that has online transaction processing, example like American Express or any other kind of online commerce, well, maybe my RPO is down to the last and latest transaction and the latest bits of information that came in. Which means that if your recovery point is you can't lose any amount of data whatsoever, then you need a real-time system that backs up your system with every transaction, real-time synchronization, and with no potential loss. You also could look at a recovery point. Example, our disaster recovery is normal about 15 minutes on our standard unit, which means that in the event that you had a server crash, the maximum amount of time that you're going to lose is 15 minutes of work. You've got a lot to consider, such as how long it takes your employees to re-enter that data, and is there any paper documents that you can work off of in case of a restore? If not, then you need to have something that's live so you lose nothing. That's very important when you start considering your backup planning, your RTO and your RPO. How long can I be down until I start working again? And how much data can I lose when I come back up? They're two different equations, but they both must be considered when you deploy a backup system. I like to go through a checklist when I assess someone's backup. This gives a good idea of what they're utilizing and what the backup status is. I like to look at when was your last successful backup. Were there any backup failures recently? Were there any test restores? Were they successful? If not, were they documented? Have we done test virtualizations? Does the system even support virtualization on local hardware or the cloud? Are all the backup files encrypted or not? Do you have documented procedures to restore your backup? Are there encrypted keys? If so, who has them? Where are they stored? Are they stored securely on-site or off-site? Who is your backup vendor? And are the backup servers in a different room with restricted access from your primary servers? That could be very critical in the event that you have someone who comes in and steals your backup server or your primary servers. You don't want them to have easy access to get both your servers and your backups. We also want to consider, when we look at our backup strategies, are cloud-based applications being backed up as well. You can't always trust Google or Microsoft to back up your applications. Cloud-based applications do not guarantee backup or long-term retention. Once I delete a file from Office 365, typically within a matter of time, sometimes it's upwards of 30 days, I can restore those files. But that's based on retention policies of your company, and it could be much shorter than that. Some server-based programs require a special agent to be installed in servers to allow backups. Those are things like SQL Server and Microsoft Exchange. If you have those applications in your network, you do want to make sure you have a backup application running on those servers that allows you to capture the latest images and restore those quickly. If you're running Office 365 and G Suite, even though all the data is in the cloud, that does not guarantee that the cloud vendor will not have a data loss and you have to roll back to a previous state. You also have to consider, but what if one of your executives or your salespeople delete a folder or a file or an email that is very important to a process or to a sale or to your company, and you go back to Office 365, you cannot restore that because Office 365 does not have a native restore function. We offer a backup for your cloud-based applications that allows you unlimited retention time, meaning you can store Office 365 emails and documents and G Suite, Google Suite documents and emails forever and still have access to those documents. You also want to consider, when you're looking at cloud-based backups for your applications, if you have compliance requirements for retention or archiving. Some industries require that you never delete email. It can be used in a court case if for some reason you had a recall from a product that you have, or maybe it's a pharmaceutical or food, and you have to be able to prove where it came from and that you alerted certain people of certain situations. You can't depend on going back through all your employees' inboxes and sent items to try to find emails if you ever receive a subpoena for emails. They call it e-discovery. You want to make sure that your backup system for your applications does support e-discovery, so that, an example, if you wanted to track an email from a certain vendor or to a vendor, you could search for that and it would actually search all your clients, all your employees' emails, everything you have on your server, on your Office 365. It would find everything related, categorize that for you, and allow you to restore just that. Now, an archiving system properly configured will also not allow anyone to delete those files. Once they're archived forever, so that you can be sure that the data you're restoring is the accurate and real-time data in case you need that for your court cases or for your compliance. Last thing I want to talk about is when you're choosing a data backup partner. Who do you choose and what is important to you? Well, one of the first things you want to look at is where are they in the Gartner scale. Gartner rates the backup and disaster recovery vendors, and they put them on a scale. You want to make sure that you're choosing the leader in that space, so that you know your data is secure and they have a good backup, and also the company is strong too. You want to make sure they have geo-redundant data centers, meaning that if you look at the illustration here in the bottom right corner, this particular vendor has data centers all over the world. So if you were to lose, an example, you want to keep your data in your country, like some countries require, you may, in the United States, you might put your data on the East Coast and then replicate that to the West Coast. In case of power storm or if something takes down the East Coast, you could always go back to the West Coast to restore your data. You also have the availability of backing up regionally across the world in case you have sites in those areas as well. You want to make sure that they do have data centers in your country. That's very important in countries like Canada and other in Europe that requires all the data to stay in that country. Do they have a process that's easy to manage and report on? Do they have a security dashboard like the one here on the left side that makes it easy to see all your successes and failures and to restore data simply if you need to? It's very important that you choose a vendor that has a simple process and a documented process. Again, you want to make sure they're recognized as a leader in disaster recovery industry. You want to make sure that they have make sure that you have a stable company that won't go away tomorrow, and that they're financially sound as well. Do they guarantee recovery times? I know that's important to some companies. It is to me. I want to make sure that I can give my clients a good, say, a 15-minute recovery time if that's important to them. If you can't do that, then maybe you need to look for another backup vendor. Some backup vendors do not guarantee recovery times, they just guarantee that the data is recoverable. We currently have the availability of offering a 15-minute recovery time for all of our disaster recovery scenarios. Do they provide on-site hardware that's powerful enough to run your total environment? That's a good question. You got to consider that as you move forward with your backup planning, because some companies choose just a bare metal, bare server on site that takes images of your servers. Let's say you had 5 servers being backed up. Typically what we see is the hardware provided is meant to run maybe 1, maybe 2 of those 5 servers. You need to make sure that in the event you had a total server meltdown, everything crashed in your office, that you could virtualize all servers on this piece of hardware. If it's not capable of doing that, you need to have run multiple on-site hardware appliances, or have something that's configured that's large enough to run all your environment in case you ever need to. The worst thing that can happen is you go to spin up your disaster recovery, and even though it might take 15 minutes to spin up one server, if you're spinning up 5 or 7 or 10 servers or more, you could be looking at hours or days to get those servers to convert their images, their backup images, and to mount. Do they provide secure cloud recovery? That's important too. Some companies will do local virtualization on their local appliance, but if you ever have to go to the cloud, you have to restore the entire images back to local hardware and then turn those on for virtualization. Our backup system that we support, our disaster recovery data security system, provides the ability, and in case you have a total disaster and your office isn't available, or maybe all the equipment on site gets damaged or stolen, we can virtualize, boot up your entire environment, all your servers, all your data in the cloud in the matter of minutes. And we also turn that cloud copy on every night, get to a login screen, just to make sure that we're confident that we can assure you that we can restore that data if we ever need to. Not all vendors do that. You want to make sure you ask the right questions when considering a backup partner. Well, that's all we have at this time about data security and the backup disaster recovery. Today we talked about how backup disaster recovery is now the final line of defense in your battle against ransomware. We talked about it should be managed by a security team, not by your IT team typically. There are 2 major types of backup: file level backup and imaging. We talked about the differences and weaknesses of each one and the strengths of each one. We talked about how to determine your RTO, RPO recovery time. You have to consider that to make sure the backup system you choose is right for you. We learned that local storage is not always enough, that you need to also include cloud offsite storage for all of your backup images and all your backup files. And all those images you take off-site must be encrypted, because if someone was to steal your backup appliance or something happens to your cloud provider, we're going to make sure all that data is unreadable without your encryption keys. We're going to make sure those encryption keys are kept by the proper people in your company and they are kept secured away. Without those encryption keys, you will not be able to restore your images if you ever have to. We also learned that cloud backups such as Office 365 and the G Suite need to be backed up separately. Those cloud applications do not guarantee backup or recovery from lost files or deleted files. Again, use the checklist that we provided to assess your current backup system and make any changes required. One thing you don't want to skimp on and you always want to be sure that your backup will get you back safely to the operating state you were before you had your attack or your lost files, and that your backup system does protect you against ransomware and not just deleted files. Well, I hope that was informational. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you back tomorrow. We talk about encryption.